Good afternoon. I'm Noreen Phillips, an HMI within Education Scotland. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you this afternoon, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for what we hope will be a useful session. This is the second of our 6 webinars based on the professional learning paper, What Scotland Learned, Building Back Better. We put a link to this paper in the chat for you. This professional learning paper was the outcome of a synthesis of the publication What Scotland Learned, 100 Stories of Lockdown, with relevant national and global research literature. We structured the professional learning paper into 6 themes: relationships, leadership, health and well-being, learning and teaching, communities, and finally successes and achievements. Webinars based on these themes are taking place between now and June, with the first seminar on relationships having been held in February. This afternoon's webinar is focused on the theme of learning and teaching. It was clear from the stories we received that throughout the pandemic, educators from all sectors across the whole of Scotland have been flexible and adaptive in their response to supporting learners and their families. The initial lockdown, as we all know, was a steep learning curve, with a move to remote learning and the many challenges that this brought. Educators quickly developed creative ways to support learning at home, including through the use of digital technology. Whilst digital skills and accessibility played a key part in the remote learning offer, research also identified the importance of teacher skills in pedagogy and assessment in supporting learners during and after the pandemic. Further, a report by the United Nations recognised the need for teachers to be able to adapt the curriculum and differentiate effectively to provide equitable and inclusive education. Collectively, these are seen as some of the most important factors in securing good learning outcomes for all. It's important to consider what we can learn from dealing with this pandemic in order to build back better. This webinar offers insight into how some of these key findings are informing practice in real time. We are delighted to have with us today Jenny Watson, Head Teacher of Dice Primary School in Aberdeen. Jenny was until recently a Senior Education Officer for Curriculum with Education Scotland. She's joined by one of her deputy head teachers, Emma Shani, and they will share their approaches as children return to classrooms from a second lockdown period. We are equally delighted to be joined by Bruce Robertson, Rector of Berwickshire High School, and the author of The Teaching Delusion. Like Jenny, Bruce has taken up his role during the COVID-19 pandemic. Bruce is joined by Derek Huffman, his principal teacher of pedagogy, to share the work they're undertaking, which reflects the key considerations for learning and teaching in order to build back better. The format of this seminar will be short presentations from each pair of colleagues. These will undoubtedly address many of the questions that were submitted prior to our event this afternoon, and thank you for that. There will be a little time at the end for discussion of a few of the questions that you sent in. Please feel free to contribute your thoughts, comments and reflections in the chat as we will monitor these throughout the session. Now I'm going to hand over to Jenny and Emma to share their Building Back Better journey at Dice Primary. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm just checking that you can hear me okay?
Sounds good, Jenny.
Excellent, that's great, thank you. I've managed to not switch my camera on, so I do apologise, but I will show my face later on. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Jenny Watson, Head Teacher at Dice School, and delighted that Emma Shinney, one of our Deputy Head Teachers, is here to share our journey. And I'm really pleased to share what's been happening for us during lockdown. So today, building back better at Dice School. We're going to share a little bit of our context at Dice and the journey we've had over the last 5 months. We're going to talk about how the building blocks from Scotland's curriculum, the refresh narrative, has helped to shape our journey, with a focus very much on the 4 contexts at Dice and reimagining the curriculum at Dice. So just a little bit about our context. We've got 500 pupils across the early years in primary. We have bespoke language support provision which provides access for pupils across Aberdeen and about 50 members of staff. Over the last 7 years, there's been many changes at Dice School and real problems with recruiting staff. So the school hasn't been without its difficulties and challenges. Dice itself is part of Aberdeen, but is very much a village. It's got a real strong community pride. It's a wonderful location. It's surrounded by lots of open spaces and has easy access to Aberdeen City and to the Shire, so lots of opportunities. It is absolutely DYW City. We are surrounded by businesses, by the airport, by industry, by hotels. And that is a really rich environment to be part of and very exciting. But it also comes with its challenges for the Dice community with the changes in the energy sector, and that's been magnified recently with COVID and the changes in employment. So there's a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. So I joined the school end of October as a new head teacher, and it's actually 5 months now, not 4 months, and it's been a real period of change. Liam Sturrock, one of our deputies, joined us at the end of November. Emma has been on maternity leave and just joined us, I think, 3 weeks ago. And during that time, when I started, we had 8 weeks when everyone was in school, and then, as you all know, it was lockdown. And what we'd planned for January, we had to be agile and responsive and change like everyone else across Scotland. And then we had our early years, primary 1 to 3, coming back in February, and then P4 to 7. So over that time, we started looking back in November at the 4 contexts and what that would mean at Dice School and our community. And in December, we started looking a little bit at Winter Wonderland. We had some partners coming in to support from Adventure Aberdeen, starting to build skills in outdoor learning and looking at how that would develop. And we also spent quite a long time planning a Burns context for January and very much getting the pupils, particularly the primary 7 litres, involved in that. Obviously, we'd adapt those plans. And then in February, we had some children in school, some out of the school, and we're going to share a little bit how that went with a walk in the past. And then months to March started as a context for our younger children, but then our older children are back in school as well. Very much when I was had the privilege of being at Education Scotland as working in the curriculum innovation team with Joan and Elizabeth, I was very much involved in the refresh narrative. I was actually involved in that in my previous headship at Middleton Park School, and it was a real privilege to be able to carry on that journey when I was at Education Scotland and be involved in the formulation of it and also in delivering the key messages. So for me, to coming back into school as a head teacher, it was a real opportunity to really look at the building blocks in the refresh narrative and look at how they could be used to build back better at Dice School. So we started looking at the 4 contexts, and as I said, this really was going to be planned as everyone in school, but obviously that didn't work out. But we done a lot of the planning and we populated the 4 contexts in this way. And what we found was that parents really welcomed this. They found it was a really easy way for them to see what was going on. They really liked the set learning activities that we're using in Google Classroom, where every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And it gave us in the school a real opportunity to demonstrate that the learning was right across the 4 contexts and to give Wednesday over for opportunities for personal achievement and the ethos and life of the school. We got a fantastic reception to working in this way. The pupils really liked the opportunities for personalisation and choice and the freedom to present the work on the Wednesdays in any way that they wanted to. Our Dice Burns competition was just a wonderful way of celebrating that. And we had our virtual Burns Day on the 25th. And there are 500 children in the school, so we did divide it up into different units where they're working, but with lots of people that were joining on. And, you know, while it wasn't the richest, truest IDL, it was certainly steps in that direction. We also started at this time during lockdown experimenting with ThingLink as a way of offering the pupils more personalisation and choice when they were at home. So our school is divided into 3 units, the red, green and blue. So the green unit is primary 2 to 4, so really at first level. So we put together lots of different activities for them that they could do at any time of the week, but directed towards on a Wednesday. And the pupils really responded to this choice and having all these different opportunities and different mediums that we're using. And that's certainly a silver lining that we're going to keep going as we build back better for the rest of this session and for the next year. Also, when we were in January, we had a hub operating at the school, and that was for about 40 children. They came and went on different days depending on emergency childcare, and we also had some of our vulnerable learners working with us. For me, we took over Wednesdays as a personal achievement ethos in life as outdoor expeditions. And it was a fantastic way of trying out different ways of working with the young people in the outdoors and thinking, what would an outdoor expedition look like? What would the skills be that we're developing? How could it permeate the curriculum? And listening to the feedback from the children on these days. We got tremendous feedback. They absolutely loved it. You know, it comments like, this is too good to be true, Mrs. Watson. Are we really getting to do this? And I remember one boy running out at the end of the day and greeting his granny and saying, this has been the best day of my life. So we really felt we'd something here that we wanted to take forward. And it allowed us a little bit of time, a wee silver lining, to do a little bit of planning of how we could build this across the school when everyone was back. I'm just going to show a very short clip here to give you a little glimpse of, you know, when we had the hub children in, of what our outdoor expeditions looked like. So great fun. And actually I have to say my own well-being, I felt so much better on these days being outside, and a definite silver lining because I wasn't generating lots of emails. I tended to get a lot less emails on those days. One of the outdoor expeditions was all about a pop-up art gallery, and again the children demonstrated their work. We had it in the school, but we used ThingLink to share it with the parents so they could see what was happening in this school. And again, that was really well received. And it gave the children a lasting legacy to their work as well, which they really enjoyed. I'm going to pass over to Emma now, who's going to take us on to our next context. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Jenny. So, as Jenny shared, I returned from maternity leave just in time for our February in-service day. And this provided me with the perfect opportunity to work alongside our colleagues to plan for the upcoming February and March contexts, as well as our outdoors expeditions. So first up was February, and you can see here that our learning across the 4 contexts for February saw us take a walk in the past. I have to say this proved to be the perfect context to explore during lockdown. Learners were encouraged to get out and explore dice during daily exercise, And what a perfect excuse to contact loved ones who they'd perhaps not seen in a while in order to carry out interviews and find out a little bit more about what it was like growing up in Dice. I think our little village-like community is very much one where you've got generations of all grown up in Dice. So it really was a really rich learning opportunity. And I think that's where our virtual museum really came to life. So the virtual museum itself starts off in a main room, and this replicates our own corridor in our school. So visitors can then click on the arrows to navigate through to the different units within our school, as well as heading outside where our pop-up art gallery could be found too. It was created as a digital platform, so again we used ThingLink for this. Staff all received training on this during our February and Service Day, and it meant that every class were able to then share their work to showcase the learning that had taken place. So I'd now like to share just a short clip which provides a little bit of a taster of what was created from our virtual museum. Now, I have to say that some of the Minecraft museums that we saw created were absolutely phenomenal. They really were fantastic. So that's a little snippet of it. If you would like to see more, you'd be very welcome to visit our school website, which is where the museum is. So at the end of the month, staff take time to evaluate their learners' work across the 4 contexts, which you can see an example of here. This aims to capture the learning really in its simplest of forms. We then collate these and share them across the school, both with staff as well as our parents. And I think moving forward, this will then be used to support our moderation as we then look to build on this further. So the museum itself, it's really exceeded all expectations. We are so incredibly proud of our learners. We've received such wonderful feedback. We created a visitor book to allow us to collate the feedback we received, and every class was invited to share feedback based on 3 key questions. These were: what makes you feel proud, what did you enjoy the most, and what would make the museum even better. And you can see here in this slide a Wordle that was created by one of our primary 3 classes, as well as some of the feedback that we've received so far. I just love the mention of the corridor, really transporting the visitor back in time to when she walked down her school corridor. I think that's lovely. We also received some recognition in both local and national newspapers, including being named as Scottish School of the Week, which was wonderful. And there was also a motion put forward to Parliament, congratulating pupils and staff on their hard work and recognising the positive impact that this had had for our community during lockdown as well. March then saw our context for learning change to a world of imagination. Our expeditions have brought such a real buzz around the school. Monster March became our tagline, and the monsters really have been popping up absolutely everywhere in school. So again, we created a learning across the 4 context grid, and informal feedback from parents so far is that they really like the simplicity of this. It helps them make the learning experiences very clear. So this time, however, we provided one for primary 1 to 3 and then a slightly different one from primary 4 to 7. This was simply because by this point we were delighted to have our younger learners back in the building, and our expeditions were able to have a key feature within the month of March for these. So our monster expeditions have really taken off. We've worked with local storytellers, Adventure Aberdeen, as well as our own PE specialists to create a 4-week expedition. So week 1 looked at what does our monster look like. Week 2 was then where does our monster live? Week 3 was where does our monster go? And then week 4, which has just been this week now, has been exhibition time and a real celebration of what the children have achieved over the past 4 weeks. So one of our very talented support staff created our sketch note as a background for our thing link. And this, as you can see, showcases the journey over the past 4 weeks with a particular focus on allowing our learners to explore, design, create and share their work along the way. Having this planned in advance really allowed our staff to focus on the 4 capacities and ensured that we're all then using the language as consistently as possible, and that will obviously continue to be built on as we move forward. I have had the absolute privilege of joining Primary 2 and Primary 2-3 every week, and we've just had an amazing time. 3 stations are set up every week, which the children rotate around. During March, these have had a storytelling focus, an art focus, and then health and wellbeing. And one of our primary 2s, one of the first weeks said straight away, he's like, oh, time flies when you're having fun. And that has definitely been the case every Monday afternoon for us. The theme of monsters has also then naturally spread right through our curriculum. There have just been so many cross-curricular links being made, and some of the writing and artwork in particular have just been outstanding. So before I hand back to Jenny, I'd just like to share with you a short clip which gives a taster of the fun we've had whilst learning during these monster expeditions.
Sorry about that, slight technical hitch. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, the Monster March has just been so much fun. We kind of got to be dragged inside the senior leadership team. We've all been taking the turns to go out and support, but I think we'd all like to be there every afternoon with them. So one of our key focuses that we're looking at is also the skills and using the 4 capacities, and as Emma said, to have that common language. So when our storytellers or our support from Adventure Aberdeen have been coming in, we've all been talking about the shared language, the skills, the attributes that we're looking to develop so that we're all using the same language, so that's that shared knowledge as we progress. This is an area we're looking to develop. Just now we've got the primary 4s to 7s back, and they've been having their own expeditions in the morning and very much focusing in on the skills, particularly the teamwork and the collaboration, very conscious that they've been behind screens, they've been at home, a lot of them alone, so really trying to build on those skills. So looking forward to next term, we have 3 expeditions planned. As you can see, what can we grow, what can the wind power, and what can our bodies do? Very much looking at the 4 capacities and the skills development and the 4 contexts, but also working in partnership with partners from the business industry world. So for example, Global Energy Group are becoming very involved in what can the wind power, and they're looking at sharing career aspirations in that sector, as well as having virtual meetings with engineers to look at wind turbines offshore. What can our bodies do is tying in with some of the key sporting events, but also an opportunity for older pupils to lead some of the expeditions through looking at different sports and different festivals. In February, we had an opportunity to work with all our staff in service days, and we used Jamboard to help identify priorities. As you can see, 3 really clear key priorities came out through the collaboration. And we feel that the expeditions are a great way, because in the expeditions, the catalyst really is the outdoors, and that's the springboard for a lot of the learning. And we're really seeing opportunities for people leadership, opportunities for them to develop and apply their skills, and health and well-being is central to it all. So just as I finish off, what we're looking at for our Reimagining the Curriculum at Dice School, looking at what we've learned over the last few months, is to have our curriculum as 9 expeditions that are embedded in the outdoors, really maximising all those opportunities in our own local area. And we've got a co-design event planned for May, where we're going to be invited, the Parent Council are helping us organise this, to invite different partners in from the business community sector with pupils and staff to look at what those expeditions might look like, and to make sure that pupil leadership is absolutely key to it. Pupil-led expeditions, training for primary 7s as their expedition leaders. So we're really excited to see how this unfolds and to see where it takes us. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and I will now pass back. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny and Emma. You know, it sounds like such great fun for pupils and also for staff in Dice Primary. And I loved the quote about the little boy coming into school and saying it was the best day of my life. You know, that was absolutely wonderful. So I'll now pass over to Bruce and Derek to tell us about their school. Thank you so much again.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bruce Robertson. I'm the rector of Berwickshire High School in the Scottish Borders. I'm joined this afternoon by Derek Huffman, who is my principal teacher of pedagogy. So this is Berwickshire High School, a school of about 700 students in the Scottish Borders. I'm also the author of the book, The Teaching Delusion. If you're interested in what I have to say this afternoon, you can follow me on Twitter at ttdelusion, and I have a website, theteachingdelusion.com. Our aim, the aim for Derek and I this afternoon, really threefold: explore key messages from educational literature and research, develop your understanding of pedagogical principles, and help you, I hope, to consider how these might inform your teaching. It's a whistle-stop tour. We've got about 25 minutes between us. I'll speak for about 18 minutes and Derek's going to speak for around 7. This is Pedagogical Principle 1. So the most important consideration is the extent to which all students are learning what we plan for them to learn. As we build back better then, I believe that we really need to focus on content, what we are teaching our students, and checking the extent to which all of our students are learning this content. We have a national curriculum. It's set out as experiences and outcomes. I've looked here at social studies. In blue, we can see some examples of outcomes. In orange, we can see an example of an experience. But really what we need to do, I believe, building back better, is we need to make sure that we have unpacked these experiences and outcomes so that we have identified specific content. This is what the Great Teaching Toolkit Evidence Review identifies as the #1 focus for high quality teaching and learning in schools. Teachers being clear about what specifically they are teaching and what students should be learning. It's what Dylan William identifies as one of 2 priorities in the schools that we need today. He talks about the importance of a knowledge-rich curriculum and formative assessment. According to Dylan William, these are the 2 areas that we must focus on: a knowledge-rich curriculum and formative assessment. So the way I think about that really is in terms of unpacking the experiences and outcomes so that we have identified knowledge which we can use to develop skills. I think about a curriculum which is knowledge-based, skills-orientated. Both are equally important. If we specify content in our schools, then this should lead to broader, deeper learning for everyone. It should lead to improved independent study because we're making clear to our students precisely what it is that they should be learning. It will support parental engagement because our parents will be clear about what our students are supposed to be learning. It will lead to improved assessment for the same reasons, therefore to improved moderation and to real interdisciplinary learning opportunities so that we can make genuine links across the curriculum. That's my first recommendation. Pedagogical principle 2, learning is the development of long-term memory. So we have two memory compartments. We have our working memory and we have long-term memory. When we take information in, it enters our working memory first. And our working memory is where thinking happens. Most of what is brought to our attention and we think about, we forget. However, if we make a deliberate attempt to concentrate and think on particular information, there is a chance that we will learn it. Learning is a change in long-term memory. The reason that we need to develop long-term memory is because long-term memory is what our students think with. It's what supports them to make sense of the information that we're bringing to their attention. The more they have in long-term memory, the more they can make sense of and the more they can think with. So if we're thinking about critical thinking and problem solving, skills that we're trying to develop throughout our schools, then we really need to focus on developing long-term memory so that our students have more to think with. This applies to all subjects. It's a misconception to think this would only apply in subjects, say, maths or history, and not to subjects which are more practical in nature, because knowledge exists in terms of facts and concepts and procedures. So we're looking to develop factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, so that our students can do things with it. And it applies to all stages, through primary and secondary. Pedagogical principle 3, people tend to learn what they think about. So if we go back to the work of Robert Cole and his What Makes Great Teaching paper from 2014, he would talk about the fact that learning happens when people think hard. Daniel Willingham, whose book, Why Don't Students Like School, is a book which I believe all teachers and school leaders should read. He talks about memory, long-term memory, as being the residue of thought. Here again, people tend to learn what they think about. So the way that I frame this, learning will typically happen when a deliberate attempt is made to think about specific things. What this means for us in terms of bouncing back better, building back better, is that we need to plan for thinking. We shouldn't, in my view, plan for enjoyment and being busy. We want students to enjoy their learning, absolutely. And of course, any activity will keep them busy, but the activities that we're aiming for need to be activities which support our students to think about specific things. Done well, the enjoyment will come as a result. So common being busy activities are things like copying notes from the board or a book, transferring information from one place to another but without having to think about it, and creating something just because it seems like a nice thing to do. We need to plan pedagogy to help students think about specific content. That's my build back recommendation too. Pedagogical principle 4, producing product doesn't necessarily evidence learning. So you may have asked students to research the causes of acid rain, and to evidence their learning, you may have asked them to produce a PowerPoint presentation of that. That's the product. But the PowerPoint presentation doesn't evidence learning. The PowerPoint presentation evidences that students have found some information about acid rain online, and they've transferred it into a different format. So we need to be thinking about what the evidence that we're gathering is actually telling us. Learning, as we've said, is a change in long-term memory. So really the evidence that we're looking for students to generate, to indicate to us that they have learned, it needs to be evidence which is coming from long-term memory. Pedagogical principle 5, a teaching learning gap is inevitable but reducible. So what is taught is not necessarily learned, certainly not straight away. 3 reasons for that, to do with students perhaps not paying attention, as we believe they are, maybe not understanding what we think they're understanding, and because they forget things. So forgetting is just, it's a very natural, it's just a very, very natural thing. We need to accept that forgetting absolutely will happen, no matter how well we've presented content. So the point really here is that we shouldn't think about teaching and learning as covering content. What we need to be doing is we need to be checking to which the extent to which this content is being learned, minute by minute and lesson by lesson and week by week and month by month and term by term. So this is how I see assessment. These minute by minute, lesson by lesson, week by week points, which in school, minute by minute questioning, discussion, observation, use of show me boards, lesson by lesson, daily review, exit tickets, weekly review, monthly review, topic review, that the key purpose being formative. We're using it so that we as teachers can get information about the extent to which students are learning what we want them to learn, and so that we can give feedback to students. But increasingly, as we move through this table, they become more and more summative in function. They're pulling together a broader body of content. So I think we need to focus on this as we build back better. When we assess things, we should think about assessing from different angles, and there is no issue with assessing the same thing over and over and over. That will help learning. The act of recalling information from long-term memory will strengthen memory. So we should think about assessment as being an active learning activity, use of multiple choice questions, true or false statements, deliberate mistakes exercises. These are excellent ways to assess the extent to which students have learned what we want them to learn. Assessment then is the key to bridging the teaching learning gap. So that's Build Back Better recommendation 3. Blend continuous formative assessment with periodic summative assessment. My final principle, pedagogical principle 6, novices and experts, they think and they learn differently. So in long-term memory, students store knowledge as schema, and the schema which novices have, they are less detailed than the schema that experts have. Experts are people who know more about things and have more to think with. So for novices, we need to use specific teaching approaches. Direct interactive instruction and formative assessment should be the focus for any student of any age in any course who's starting to learn content in the early stages. If we think about Bloom's taxonomy, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build the knowledge base to develop understanding so that students can apply and analyze and evaluate and be creative. These things are very, very important, but we need to build the knowledge base first. The misconception is that older students can be taught differently, but that's not true. Whenever we're starting to teach new content at any age, students are novices to begin with. They become more and more expert as we're going through. Novices need taught differently to experts. If we're thinking about direct interactive instruction, then we need to go to the work of people like Barak Rosenshine, who identifies 10 principles of instruction. I don't have time this afternoon to go through these, but I would encourage you to research his paper online if you haven't come across that. Work of John Hattie would say exactly the same thing. Again, if you're not familiar with his work, I'd encourage you to have a look at it. He talks about effect sizes. The practices in summary at the top having the biggest impact on student learning, and the practices towards the bottom less of an impact. Certainly in the early stages of learning, when students are novices, the practices towards the top of the table are the practices which are best for novices. As students become more and more expert, then the practices towards the bottom of the table become more and more appropriate. So as our students become expert, it's non-specific teaching, which is really the right approach for them. This is about student-led learning. It's about learning by research and inquiry, applying learning in open-ending tasks, and consolidating learning independently. These are all important things, but the key point is that they need to come at a particular point in the learning sequence. So high-quality teaching, in my view, is a blend of specific and non-specific approaches. But typically the balance will be towards specific. This is captured by this idea of a learning sequence. Start with specific teaching and fade that out. Start to build in non-specific teaching as you move through that learning sequence. Build the knowledge structure, let students apply what has been learned. So that's my final recommendation. Blend specific and non-specific teaching, guided by the learning sequence. Summary, before I hand over to Derek, 6 pedagogical principles. 4 build back better recommendations. Derek, over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Can you see me, Bruce?
Yeah, we can see you.
All right, can you see my presentation? Just make sure that's on the screen there. Okay, well, so as Bruce said, my name's Derek Huffman. I'm the PT of Pedagogy at Berkshire High School, and I want to talk a little bit about turning it off and turning it back on again, which seems to really fix everything. And leaving all the problems relating to technology to the side for a moment, during the remote learning experience, we were left with the problem of maintaining high levels of student engagement. So looking at our school's engagement spreadsheet, where we were monitoring specific student engagement across all subjects, I contacted teachers where they seemed to be keeping the students coming back for more. And although we weren't all doing things in the exact same way, there were some important things that we had in common that were hooking the students. The first thing might seem a bit unnecessary to even mention, but the more successful teachers started by simplifying everything. This does not mean that they dumbed things down in the remote setting. Rather, those that were engaging students were simplifying all aspects of their communication. Most teachers I know seem to love making things as complicated as possible. So it was worth for the successful teachers to try to keep to around 3 slides with the learning intentions communicated as clearly as possible. No unnecessary words. What you see is what you'll learn. And I don't need to tell you all about the reasons that being clear about the learning intentions for both the teacher and the student is important. Part of this is about avoiding the cognitive overload that a lot of students struggle with at the best of times. Take a look at the following example. Now, there's nothing particularly bad about this example, and it has a lot of important information for what the teacher might be trying to teach. But it's just too much for a lot of students to, especially those who are struggling to access their work on their own or who were, to take in. So this should really make us take a step back now and ask ourselves, if this is too much for the average student to handle remotely, maybe I shouldn't be using things like this in my classroom. Could I simplify, or to use perhaps a better term, clarify the way I'm communicating in real life too? A related thing these engaging teachers seemed to be doing is really thinking about the way they presented their success criteria. The most successful success criteria tends to read like a checklist, like in this example from our physics department, where the students can literally check off the criteria as they go. This really helps to keep, it helps to avoid students coming back saying, I don't know what to do. If the success criteria has been discussed and modeled alongside the learning intention, and it's worded clearly and concisely, they should usually be able to follow along, effectively seeing themselves learning as they go. How many times were you told, I don't know what I'm supposed to do over the remote learning situation? The next big thing the successful teachers were doing in remote lessons was creating a consistency of experience for the students. Students knew that at this time they were to go here, and then they either got a live lesson or a very clear set of instructions. And when they did go here, they usually experienced a similar lesson structure. It starts with a daily review or a weekly or a monthly review where the teacher checks what the students know already or what they remember from the previous lesson, gaining valuable formative assessment information and exploiting the retrieval practice that Bruce mentioned. And then it moved into a discussion of the very clear learning intentions and success criteria, followed by modeling. And then students were given time to complete the work during which the teachers were available to answer questions, followed by a plenary, which checks whether or not students have learned what was said at the start. Now, these aren't things that we do because we were told to do them. These are things that we do because we understand their importance and how useful they actually are. Another thing the teachers having success were doing was giving frequent, useful bits of feedback. Now, this does not mean, very importantly, giving screeds and screeds of written feedback, which just takes up a lot of teacher time and proves to be of limited use for the students anyway. We're talking here of things like quick bursts of verbal feedback recorded into their work in apps like OneNote, which they can access again and again, making sure that the learning intention and success, like the learning intention and success criteria, it was boiled down and focused on next steps. The work that's been done with clarifying the learning intention and success criteria really makes identifying the next steps easier for us and more useful for the students. As was said earlier, it's really been a steep learning curve for everyone, taking even the most tech-savvy amongst us out of our comfort zones. But the great thing is that it has forced us, or it really should be forcing us, to reevaluate everything that we're doing, from what our slides look like, to how we word our learning intentions and success criteria, to how we present content, to how we give feedback. It's been a real Control-Alt-Delete for our practice. And for those of you who may not remember, these are the keys that when you're faced with some sort of glitch, will reboot your personal computer. And that's what we should be doing now as we try to build back better. You may remember that I set out our original problem at the school is relating to maintaining high levels of student engagement in a remote setting. And it's interesting, but perhaps not surprising that good remote teaching is actually just good teaching. Now that we've been forced to turn it off and turn it back on again, we should be asking ourselves, shouldn't these goals be our goals for the classroom too? This isn't about dumbing things down or teaching less stuff. This is about clarity. Because of this horrible thing that's turned the whole world on its head, we should be coming out of this with more than just teachers that are better at attaching a file to an email. This has given us the opportunity to step back and recognize what's really important, teaching and learning, and it has really amplified the problems we've always faced but rarely understood or did much about in the classroom, like students nodding and smiling when we ask the very meaningless question, does everyone understand? That's the equivalent of the silence we got in a Teams meeting. How do I know whether they know what they should know? Teaching remotely is a reminder that I need to be making their learning visible, using show me boards. I need to be interacting. I need to be asking questions. I need to be giving more verbal feedback. I need to be checking that they know what they should know. By rebooting the way we do things, we're all hopefully going to get so much more satisfaction out of what we're doing. Now, Bruce and I have had to rush through some pretty big points. So if you think we might be able to help you out in any way moving forward with any of this stuff, then please get in touch, and that's my email address. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your professional view and your perspective, and I really liked all the references that you shared as well, really important references. Thank you so much for that. So we have time for a few questions, and what we've done is we looked at the questions that everyone sent in and we kind of themed them. I'll just find them here. You give me 2 seconds. Wait up a second now. So the first one from the participants was, how can we ensure that teachers and schools do not just default back to familiar and comfortable approaches to learning and teaching, but instead use our collective learning from the past year to build back better? And obviously both your presentations were about that. If I go to Jenny and Emma first for their thoughts on that question, please.
Hi, thank you. I'll get my camera on this time. Yeah, really interesting question. We spent quite a bit of time at our in-service day in February just looking for those silver linings and used the Jamboards. We heard all the voices of all the staff, our support staff, as well as our teachers. And really, by helping to identify the silver linings, we're then able to say, what are we going to take forward with us? So it was a collective, agreed priorities. And then, for our own setting, it's really about, looking at how we're going to take those priorities forward, giving people time for planning, time for looking at different research, and time to collaborate together. And I think as well, we've got this wonderful platform now. Look at us all gathered together across Scotland. We've got a global platform using technology, and to use that expertise and research to help us as we move forward, to remember, the lessons and building back better. I think all those key things will help us as we move forward.
Thank you so much for that. I'll go now to Bruce and Derek. Any thoughts on that, Bruce?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. For me, it's about investing in a high quality professional learning offer for all of our staff. I wrote an article about this for the Times Ed a couple of weeks ago. It's about supporting staff to engage with educational literature and research and making time for them to discuss that. So the sorts of pedagogical principles that I was framing in my presentation, these are not ideas that have just come to me. These ideas come about from professional reading, discussion, thinking about that, and it's just these ideas coalescing together. So I think that in working time agreements, schools need to prioritise professional learning. I think with our budgets, we need to prioritise investing in our staff through professional learning, a high quality professional reading library, for example. Making sure that the focus of the meetings that we have in school, this precious time that we have, is really about professional learning, and not really, minimising the need to talk about administration. That's how I think that we do it. It's about discussion. There are no absolutes in education, so the views that I've put across this afternoon, and Derek as well, these are put across for people to think about and then to arrive at their own conclusions. So I think that we need to make the time for that in schools.
Absolutely, yeah. And both your presentations, have built on some of the key points that you'll see up on the screen on learning and teaching, about effective and inclusive pedagogy and assessment approaches, the promotion of independent learning skills in pupils, to become most self-directed. And that's something that's come up in the pandemic. We have a lot of pupils that are saying to us they're now more self-directed when they were before, obviously building on digital technology, as you're all doing. And that this collaboration that you have both spoke about at all levels as well. And, as the Building Back Better, you're reimagining the education for the future. So all positive. Now, I think we've time for one more question. And this question is, what is the role of assessment in Building Back Better? What should be our focus in the short term? And you've answered a lot of that already in your presentations. I just wonder if there's any other information you could share with the participants. Jenny, if we go to you first again, please.
Yeah, I think in the short term, our focus at DICE, and again, we all know our own local context and where we are in our journey, but our own focus is very much on the health and well-being. We have got some children that are very anxious, that are struggling, so we feel that that is really important. And then it's also that empowerment of our pupils, putting them right at the centre so they're fully involved in their own assessment, giving them the language, building their skills. So I think those would be the two things that are immediately springing to mind for me in the short term.
Thank you so much. Bruce, any other points?
Yeah, well, I think that assessment is just integral to pedagogy. People sometimes separate assessment and pedagogy, but for me, they are one and the same. The word assessment really means to check. So in one of the slides that I had, I talked about as we're going through particular content, we are checking all the time in an interactive way. When we're talking about inclusive pedagogy, it's that interaction that I think is so important. That's how you get to know students. So it's that minute by minute, lesson by lesson, week by week assessment used formatively. It guides the teacher. You can check the extent to which students have understood and learned what you're aiming for, so that then your teaching becomes responsive. And then periodically, I was suggesting we need something a little bit bigger than that, which gives students the opportunity to pool together their learning in creative ways. But that's what it is, I think. Continuous low stakes assessment used formatively, blended with periodic higher stakes assessment used summatively.
And if I could just add to that really quickly, I think it's really important that we take a step back and try to remember what assessment is actually for, because we're often just kind of looking at grades and things like that. And of course, assessment is for creating impact in the students. And so starting whenever we're doing any sort of assessment, we should start by asking what impact will this have on our students? And then that will drive assessment in the right direction.
Thank you so much. We're now just at time, so that was perfect timing, both of you. Well done. So can I thank Jenny, Emma, Bruce and Derek for their presentations and their perspective. And can I also thank our Education Scotland team for putting this together as well. Mo, Diane, Ian, Susie, Marianne and Janine, thank you so much for that. And if you could complete the short feedback form that's posted in the chat, that would be great. But thank you. That was a really good session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.